All right, at 6:30, I'll call this work session of the mayor and council to order. Today is August 26, 2013. For the record, before we get started, Mr. Powell, we've had a request for hearing assistance. We're okay going forward?
Yes, we are. We're okay having a meeting. There's a procedure that I understand is underway in terms of assisting our complainant. And what I understand it to be is that on issues where he has an interest, it gets transcribed, that there has to be communication in advance of that occurring in terms of interest. So I think it's getting worked out. So, and that's really what our legal requirement is to have a policy, which we have, and then to react to that policy with a person who's responsible for doing that within the city.
And that's what
Are
I'm.
you taking responsibility for that, or who is the contact person?
I think I can make a comment.
I need to be given some of the actions that took place today.
Okay.
So I think we're doing what we're supposed to, and that's communicate and then deal with it according to the policy.
And I had just sent, I think Melissa had communicated with Mr. Blankenship probably yesterday in response to the letter, was it last week? And we continue to try to work it out. If we could just get on the same page, we are trying to put a procedure in place that where we meet the requirements in the law, and Mr. Blankenship gets what he deserves under the law, and we will do that.
Mr. Blankenship, understand you object to what, you don't agree with what they're saying, but based on the city attorneys, I'm gonna move forward with the
Well, he's
meeting.
made the question, but I've got a request tonight that I won't be able to hear this meeting, and he's got a request in there, ma'am. It was put in this morning for both meetings,
But we're okay going forward then.
and you can look at the request.
I'll be honest, I hadn't seen the request.
It just came in this morning, and I think the law does say a 7-day
Right,
notice.
right.
Do we have, I think we might have some headphones that we can try to,
You don't have headphones in this meeting, sir, because you don't have no way to hook it up.
The request is for an interpreter. I mean, I don't mean to laugh at that, but that's normally somebody who speaks a different language, which could fall in the same category. And so I would, Mr. Blankenship can hear. I mean, he and I communicate easily, and he's hearing the conversation. So if we just take the time to speak loud enough for him to keep up.
They got to look at me when they talk.
They do. I think if we'll all assist
I don't
him.
think every one of y'all want to turn around and look at me every time y'all speak, or they're looking at the computer and talk to me, sir.
When it's on a subject matter that you have an interest in, I think we might want to accommodate that tonight in the way of just communicating clearly to you. And this is one where you do. So if we just communicate clearly to you. Now, your request is not precise or timely, but that doesn't mean that we don't adjust to the meeting and speak clearly so you
But the
can.
last thing, they never was notified when I asked for those, because I do have a speaking disability, I have a writing disability, and the city clerk has continuously to write letters, and you do this, and you don't do that, and I've got a request that was wrote on the 20th, and asked for the laws and rules, which would cover to have me to turn this in when I turned it in, sir.
And appreciating all that, but really, we're free to move forward with the meeting. And we'll process this in the normal course of things and respond appropriately.
So with that, we'll go over the regular agenda. We have the invitation announcements, pledge, ceremonial matters, Councilman Manuel, your resolution. Anything you need to say?
Excuse me?
Anything you need to say on that?
No, I just think it's something that's deserved, and glad we can do it.
We then have the minutes from the August 12th meeting. I know there was a mistake on those. You also received a corrected copy of those. Does anybody have any objections to the corrected copy?
Yes, I do, Madam Chair.
There's also a mistake I saw in the corrected copy. It's ask instead of ask.
I'd like to have a correction of the minutes on the appointment to the URA. I was the one who originally asked that Ms. Forbes' name be put on the URA for a vacant position. And I believe that's what council believed they were voting for at the last meeting. The next morning, we got a email from you saying that wasn't true, but I think it was clear by myself and the members of council that we thought that we were voting for the empty position. Why would we vote for anything else but that?
That's
And
not what the
besides that-
video reflects, and so the minutes have to reflect what occurred at the meeting, not what you thought or assumed
The
occurred.
minutes- the minutes
Let me
reflect-
finish, let me finish.
Okay.
You do not have the authority to put up a nomination on the URA. I put up the nomination. I clearly said for the term that it expires in 2017.
No, you didn't say 2017, ma'am.
And there were two.
Right.
There are two, I'm sorry.
You said 2015.
2015, I'm sorry. The other term expires in
Well,
2017.
but there are two appointments to the 2015 expiration.
No, sir, there was already an appointment made at a previous council meeting, so that term had already been appointed. There was only one vacancy, and that's Mr. Warner's term.
No, there was two vacancies. There's still one vacancy for
Sir, I had already
2017.
appointed Mr. Kirkland to the 2015 term. There's a vacancy for
Mr. Kirkland
2017.
was already on the council,
Right, and he got reappointed in June of this year.
and we still have a vacancy
Right,
on
can you
the
stop
council.
pointing that in my eyes, please, sir?
Oh, I'm sorry.
There is a vacancy for 2017, and there's a
Mhm.
vacancy for 2015. When I
Correct.
made the nomination, I clearly stated I was making it for the 2015 term.
Well, you know, the
You
members of
can't
the
change the
council.
minutes because you didn't know what I said. It's up to you to pay attention. The minutes accurately reflect what was said.
We're not gonna approve them.
That's fine. We'll move
Again,
on then to invited guests. We have no invited guests tonight. We have our committee and department reports. Ms. Bender's here with Snellville Entrepreneur Council. Has anyone seen Ms. Macklin tonight?
She'll be here.
Okay. Do you have a city manager report for us?
Very shortly.
Nothing on tonight's consent agenda. Under old business, we have the, we call it collective residence, but that's the group home ordinance.
Good.
Mr. Powell.
Well, this is in response to council's request to really deal with the issue of group homes. We redefined a lot of things that deal with all the state living facilities, from group homes, personal care homes, community living facilities, care residences, continuing care, retirement communities, all that follow the state guidelines. And I don't know how much you want me to go through it here, but it uses a special use permit process, which you're putting in your ordinance for the first time on page 2. And one of the things in considering the group home that came up last year was that you didn't really have the tools to customize the use to the neighborhood, or to preclude it in some instances where you thought there were special circumstances that wouldn't really permit at the location that was chosen. And so this puts in place not just for group homes, but a special use permit process where you're taking something that's not normal in a zoning classification, maybe more intrusive than normal. And you can use these for a lot of things, but in this case, you're talking about single family, and you're injecting into it a multifamily type of facility. And it gives you the ability to condition it and really to deny it in certain circumstances where it just doesn't fit the surrounding community. And so it does give you the ability to shape it with parking, dealing with parking, dealing with the fire code, dealing with the health department code, dealing with the unique structures, because you have single-family residential structures that are suddenly becoming group facilities. And so you can have special architectural issues that come into play. And these criteria on page 2 and 3 give you the ability to craft the ordinance to that effect. Section 2 is in the normal case of group homes, you come into an issue of what constitutes family. And most cities over the years have defined single-family residential family, that definition, as 5 unrelated parties. That's just been typical. What you're doing with this is redefining that down to 3, which obviously means you've got to have more of the traditional family kind of concept built into the definition of your term family, and it affects how many people can live in a facility without being related to each other, which is a step in that same direction. You take out conditional uses. The next part of this ordinance is really where you're repeating the way you do it now, which is a conditional use, which is sort of by right. And y'all heard your planning director when the other one was coming up. He said, hey, they meet the conditions, you got to do it. And that's the real change in procedure, is taking the next section takes out all the conditional use descriptions, so it's not by conditional use anymore. It's by special use permit. They have to meet the permitting requirements. And so taking those definitions out goes over to page 7, where you really run into the main body of the requirements of a collective residence. It's got to be one that is permitted by the state. And in that, you'll see that the state really takes each one of these uses, and they meet certain criteria for each one, and they get a permit from the Department of Human Resources. And so what happens a lot of times, you get a group home, which is a children's facility. They get it defined that way. They start business, and then they'll switch over to doing something different. It'll still be a multiple halfway house or personal care home facility, but it won't be what was expected. Those uses can make dramatic changes on what's happening in that community. And Lawrenceville's example of that is the cerebral palsy. They do a lot of these types of care homes. Y'all have, I think, cerebral palsy in 3 of them in your city. They switch from being really treating individuals with cerebral palsy to a mental health rehab facility, and in that switchover, the residents became much more mobile and out in the community, and it created some really distressing circumstances. So under this ordinance, section 2, they get permitted by the state. You see it in your special permit procedure. You approve that. If they change that definition of use or what they're doing, they got to come back and get another special use permit. So it restricts that. They also have to already be permitted by the state in order to come and qualify for your special use permit. 4 is the occupational tax requirement, which they are treated like a business for that permitting procedure in the city. And environmental health approval is number 4. They have to be a nonprofit. And that's 5. And to be a nonprofit is critical, because you see people who really take advantage of the state regulations, and they'll buy the home that's used in their individual name and let a nonprofit overlay that. And what happens is they're making a profit off of this care. And this precludes that from happening. The nonprofit actually has to be a beneficiary of the ownership of the residents. And that just keeps people who are doing this for the wrong reasons out of your city. With that comes a financial requirement of nonprofits, which you get to regulate as item number 6. You also get financial statements, which comes in under page 9G2, which is a full financial disclosure to make sure that you have the right to step in. We see a lot of examples these days of people who are taking trust accounts and beneficiaries who are actually folks staying and getting government support in these facilities and abusing that authority. So we have some in the permitting process that we're using now. We can step in and regulate those things. There are a few variations of these requirements in items number 9, which is community living arrangements, 10, which is group homes, and 11, which are family care homes, which we defined a little bit differently based on how those have operated. And that's based on the experience of the planning department. That's where those modifications We kept the collective residences shall not be located within 1,500 feet of each other and define that according to the way the planning commission wanted to do it, which is the way you measure for your alcohol requirements and everything else. We did it from along the main public right-of-way or sidewalk. Are there any questions?
Page 6 and page 5. Under group home, it says may be granted for 6 or more children.
Those are the provisions that are being deleted.
Okay.
That's the way your old ordinance reads.
Okay.
Now, there is a, you know, this is coming to you, this will come before you in a special use permit. So even though you have a permitted number, like under 9, if you look under 9 on page 8, you'll see special use permits may only be granted for the care of up to 6 persons. You see, that's the variation in the way you're still with just the community living arrangement. You have the ability to have a greater number because that's the way it's been done. That's sort of a modification that's consistent with what's been done in the past here. But when you do the special use permit procedure, you get to see that in advance. They disclose how many residents they plan to have, and so it's not a right to 6, but it just depends on the facility and the surroundings and how y'all want to work it into the community. It could be up to 6 according to the ordinance.
What about, go ahead.
On the first page of the ordinance, collective residence, I have 2 questions. When did that word come about as a legal term to represent what we've always known as a group home, collective residence?
I don't remember who invented that term. We were trying to, you know, we call these things, we call everything group home, and they're not. So what we're trying to do is come up with a word that gave definition for our code only so that we could class them all together and build standards around them. So if we use the term group home right there, then it's got a state definition that doesn't apply to all the different types of residences you can have. So it has no legal impact until you pass this ordinance. This will be the first time that term has really been used. So,
And, you know, I read through this, and the first thing that really struck me was on that first paragraph of the ordinance in the last, second line from the end where it says that, actually, the third from the end where it says 1 or more personal services, support, care, or treatment exclusively for 2 or more persons who are not related, 2 or more people. But I see that later on it's been defined a little clearer than that, because that kind of gave misleading numbers.
right, you don't have to have a special permit to have residents with up to 3. And so, you know, that's meets your family definition after this ordinance is adopted. It's when you step up above that, when this clicks in and starts applying, you've got a special care facility, so.
Is that all, Councilman?
Yes, that's it.
Domestic violence shelters, things like that, they still can come in because they would just apply them for the special use permit.
Domestic,
They'd be a collective living arrangement,
Right.
or a community living arrangement, I guess, under the definitions that have been brought forward. That's where they get their permit from Department of Human Resources, is as a community living arrangement. Then if they met the space requirements and everything else that has been worked into the new ordinance, then we can pass them through with a special use permit.
and those are good examples of why the special use permit procedure would be really good, because you've got safety concerns, and so it's good to have that review.
Existing group homes, what happens to them?
That's why we had this on the work session agenda. And I think John had a recommendation about what to do.
Recommendation would be to grandfather them, because we've taken out all of the area requirements. They are residential uses. They've been in operation for years here. and I don't see any reason to upset the boat.
Some of them are in operation but are not in compliance with even our previous ordinances, so.
If y'all want them licensed, let me know.
And that is the grandfathering, or the way you look at this, treat this as far as those existing ones. You know, if they didn't comply before, or if they were issued during the moratorium, or issued, if they showed up during the moratorium period, they would not be grandfathered, and then that would be a time period. But you do have, and I think most cities have, a bunch of these types of facilities where they didn't come in and seek the proper permitting.
And some of these that we have, we did check the back records on, and they were actually built as group homes. That's how they were permitted, with the building permits. Now, they don't, I can't track back to where they got a permit to be a group home, but that's how it was done when they showed up 15 or 20 years ago.
Those are the ones that we knew about though, and that have complied, right?
Correct. We have the ones that there are state licenses for. And as far as I know, they're the ones we have.
Question, if I could, transfer of ownership, grandfather sells.
If grandfather sells somebody new, that's a different special use permit.
Okay.
That's
So-
a new game
So in other
plan.
words, I can see somebody grandfathered would use that as a selling point to,
As I understand what Tony wrote, that would be a new use, correct?
If ownership changes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Would trigger the ordinance.
It would trigger the ordinance.
It runs with the owner, not
Now,
the
here's
land.
where it gets a little, that gets a little tricky, is if, you know, it's a nonprofit enterprise, and so it's set up with a mechanism of associates that really control that enterprise. If you don't change the owner, then it can probably, if you don't change the entity that is permitted, you know, you just change the person who's responsible for it as an association operating a nonprofit, then you're not gonna be able to trigger that.
It is a corporation,
Right.
and if you hire a new CEO, then that doesn't change the fact that you permitted that corporation.
Right.
If Corporation A sells it to Corporation B, maybe that does.
well, a management change I can see,
Mhm.
but an ownership change to me is definitive.
Oh, no question, but it's probably never gonna happen that way.
Okay.
Because it's a nonprofit operation, and it would be an employee change, that's the operator, is what's gonna occur. In dealing with, you know, if we have facilities that you are concerned about, that are either not in compliance with the current law, then, and you want to do something about those facilities, then my recommendation would be that we extend the moratorium, table this, and discuss the specifics of that. There hadn't been a lot of, in the conversations that we've had and the meetings that we've had, there hadn't been a discussion. We've talked about what to do with existing facilities, because there were 2 permits, I think, that were applied for, and were just held in place. And so that subject matter has come up. But if we have problems, if there are communities that are being harmed by what is a non-compliant, then we probably ought to deal with those before we pass the ordinance.
So is that what council wants to do?
Is that your recommendation, to table it this evening?
It is, I think the recommendation of the planning, I think the planning commission recommendation accepted what the director recommended, that's grandfather those, so we just haven't been aware of that issue. So if there are, then that is my recommendation. If they're not, then I'd accept Mr. Davis's recommendation and move on. You will have the ordinance. This puts in place the ordinance that you asked for, really with good standards.
This is the, like, second or third time that we've done the group home ordinance, so I don't wanna do it a fourth time, you know, I don't wanna keep bringing it up.
Right.
Um,
Well, if you run the risk of grandfathering in use with the passage of the ordinance, that is a problem to you that your planning director is not aware of, and I'm not aware of, then I would suggest tabling it, no question. If there aren't those, then I would accept his recommendation.
But what are the consequences if we just,
They're probably gonna have a strong argument that they are grandfathered once the ordinance is passed, or you run some risk of actually grandfathering a use if you had a problem use with the passage of the ordinance.
Well, I think anything that they can potentially hang their hat on. And I think any business would probably do that if they were in a grandfathering situation. I don't think, I'm not just pointing these folks out, I mean, any situation where you got grandfathering, somebody would certainly try to use it, I think, to their advantage if they were called into question.
Absolutely. We probably improve their situation.
So,
It's
just that alone, and I too hate, you know, to do it fourth time, but still, I hate to do it a third time incorrectly.
Right. It's a sensitive area from both perspectives. I mean, you're walking sort of a tightrope with the Fair Housing Act, and so you gotta be careful what you pass.
so the Fair Housing Act would want a formal response from us to justify delaying?
No, there's been no action taken under that. We have no claims under Fair Housing Act, so even though it's relevant to the drafting of the ordinance, and you have to be sensitive to that while you're making restrictions and even while you're passing a special use permit. It's an area that has protections for those people who wanna operate these types of facilities. So it's to put in place effective ordinances. I think you got that, but to look back and apply it to already existing facilities, that's a hard subject no matter when you bring it up. And when I say we table it and look at it, you know, it's probably an executive session discussion, and you know, those existing facilities will, it'll be a tenuous process to review or
I think we're
stop those.
talking about two different existing facilities, though. We had a couple of groups who had threatened litigation with us and who were licensed through the state, but then at the same time, our ordinance was not the same as the county's, and so we had some businesses that were opening in the city because it was easier for the county. And so my concern in grandfathering it in, and those businesses necessarily weren't properly licensed by the state, but they did open up. And so that's my concern, not the ones that we maybe have a fair housing issue with, but the ones that that haven't necessarily gone through all the proper channels. They're out there, they exist, we've gotten complaints from neighborhoods about them. If we say we grandfather everything in, you know, arguably we can say, well, you weren't in compliance anyway, you can't be grandfathered in.
Right.
But that's just making it more difficult for us by doing a blanket grandfather clause.
If we think we have totally non-compliant, which what sounds like, we have totally non-compliant facilities out there, then we probably ought to table this, extend the moratorium, and draft a provision that deals with carving those out from the grandfathering provision. So,
That makes sense. I'll go for that. But we're gonna put a date on that. Again, we can't let this be tabled.
Well, it would just be postponed until the next council
Postponed.
meeting.
Thank you. That's the one. All right. Next council meeting.
Table with whatever the proper, to date certain. All right, then we have a second